Well, hello, and welcome. It's good to see you all. Today, I'm going to just jump in with some bread of life, shall we? Because, it's been kind of a challenging little season. It's a super nice way of saying it. The really nasty way of saying it is, it's been a really incredibly taxing and trying and refining season for Chelsea and I. So, I'll see how much of that I can share right now, but as the way it is right now, I can't share too much. So what I'm going to do instead is break the bread of life with you guys and ask you all to pray for me and my family, because we could really use it right now. That being said, I'm going to jump in to 2 Samuel chapter 4. If any of you followed the Becoming a Gibborim series before, I was working my way through the mighty men of valor. If you ever read in the scriptures where it says mighty or mighty men of valor or strong man, sometimes it even says tyrant, sometimes giant. It's a word that translates from Gibbor or Gibborim, which is like the valiant one. This is where, like, in your mind, it pops into your head people like Samson, which that is so not the story that most of us grew up with, because he probably wasn't a buff dude. You ever wonder why people talk about Samson always as crawdad? Right on the old toe. Sorry. It freaks me out when things grab my toes. Super serious about that. But Samson was a mighty man like that mighty crawdad who just went after some bigger things than him. But you know why Delilah, who had to tempt Samson to try to find out his secrets for his strength, you know why we know Samson wasn't a big yoked out dude like everybody portrays him as? Because she had to ask him why he was strong. You never have to ask a buff dude why he's strong, and strong enough to lift the gates of a city out of their place and carry them up a hillside. By the way, they're real. They exist because the Bible's a history book. I always make sure people remember that. The Bible's a history book. It's not some kind of thing that was written back then so long ago that nobody really knows what it said. It's a lie. The truth is, this is the bread that came down from heaven and is here to water your weary soul. Samson was a probably scrawny-looking nobody dude that could blend into a crowd, because that's why people didn't know where he was at times. If he was the big buff dude that everybody portrays him as, everyone would know that's the big, strong Gibbor in Israel. Nobody knew that. But Delilah needed to find out where his strength came from, because his strength came from obedience to Yahweh. So that's real important. I'm going to read to you guys about 2 Samuel 4. Check this out. Another mighty Gibbor is about to enter onto the scene. And you know what's super interesting about him? He's busted up. Check this out. And the son of Shaul heard that Abner had died in Hebron, and he lost heart, and all of Yasharel was troubled. Real quick, backstory here. David, he's been on the run since Saul was trying to murder him. Every day of Saul's life when he was king, after a certain point, he spent trying to find ways to murder David. Really big fundamentals in the story here. There's people that will spend every day of their entire waking lives trying to find ways to murder you. I've been in families like that. I used to be the author of some of those murderous deaths of people. But you know what's interesting? If the favor of Yahweh, which is what we all need to seek in our life every single day, if his favor is upon us, the kings of the earth could conspire together to try to murder you, and they can't do it. David is like living witness testimony of that. Joseph with living witness testimony of that. Daniel, you ever read that story? Every Gibbor story that should pop into your head, like Gideon, all these guys who, Ehud, the left-handed assassin who makes a dagger and hides it under his leg and stabs it into a gigantic man's belly, so much so that it sinks into his flesh and is lost inside him. Ehud, the left-handed assassins. If you're left-handed, study the way of the blade. And by that, it's this. He'll even teach you how to make knives. Anyways, there's a guy, Saul, hunting David his whole life. Saul has a son named Jonathan. Go back to my episode, 5 or something. I'll put in a little link here, which talks about Jonathan and David. And Soul Ties and Disney Lies, I think is what it's called. About David's best friend in the history of his life that we know of. And his name is Jonathan. And it's Saul, the king's son. So this is the prince of Israel. And David, the shepherd boy. Besties. Broskies beyond measure, because they spilled blood together. And that's a serious deal. They were besties beyond imagination. And it says they had a soul tie. Their souls were knit together, like echad, like oneness to their souls. Anybody who's been in life in threatening situations that had to go through it with somebody else alongside them, even if they were total strangers, When I was studying in psychology back at the University of Colorado in Boulder, which is like the epicenter of nightmares for a lot of occult craziness, interesting why you might happen to go into the places that you do, because some of you have histories now that you've experienced that make you perfect, custom catered for the job that you are here to do. Anyways, at the school I was going to studying psychology, they talked about this thing that was basically the more life-threatening a situation or physiologically exciting it was, good or bad, and the people just by proximity who were near you, it would create these ties and connections to them that were like a bond a mother had with a child. So people that like fell in love in a very scary situation often found themselves not so in love later when the scary situation stopped. And that's because people that happen to go through some crap together happen to feel a relational connection that nobody else after the fact has anymore, because it's just different. Jonathan and David, they had that together because they went to war together, like more than once, often. Because remember, David, the king of Israel, killed tens of thousands of human beings. So much so that everybody used to sing a song about him killing tens of thousands of human beings. Jonathan was there at his side for a lot of that. Well, one of these battles goes down. Jonathan is there with King Saul, his father, and they all die. David is not there because David is hiding inside the enemy-occupied territory known as the Philistines. He literally is living in the land where Goliath, the giant, the Nephilim, came from. That's favor. He's hiding there, right? On the run from the law, right? That's where he's living. He's hiding there at the time. He's not able to go be there when his best friend dies. Horrible situation. Now, David is made king over Judah, which is one of the tribes of Yasharel. Real important. If you read Judah in the scriptures, or Yahudah, or the Yahudim, or the Jews, that's one of the tribes of 12 in the scriptures. There's 11 others. Saul's sons, because Jonathan dies, he has another son. He becomes the king over the rest of the house of Israel. He has a commander of his army named Abner. And Joab, which is David's super saucy, crazy, scary, murdering, killing, awesome general. Crazy situation in his life. He kills Abner one day because Abner killed Joab's brother. A lot of drama in the scriptures. You should read it. Seriously, it's amazing. He kills him. So now the king of Saul, the son of Saul, basically at this point, the king over all of Israel, is super scared. That's where our story jumps in. Hopefully that catches you out. You ready? And the son of Shaul had two men, commanders of bands. And the name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other was Rechab, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite. If you guys have a different scriptures translation than I do, these names may not sound quite the same, because this is the Hallelujah scriptures, and it's got like a parallel Hebrew and English next to it. So this is the way of saying the names as close to the Hebrew pronunciations as you can have, so that it can train our illiterate English tongues how to say certain words. So if you're reading along and they don't match your version, it's okay. Hang in there and be patient with me as I try. For Beeroth was also reckoned to Benjamin, that's one of the tribes, because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there until this day. Now Jonathan, the son of Shaul, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Shaul and Jonathan came from Yisrael. The news that his father had died and that Saul had died. So just for context, these people have real families. Something that's easy for us to forget when we're always thinking of the felt board version of Christianity we've been raised on. These were human beings like dudes and dudettes, not unlike you, dude and dudette, who's watching this, child, young man. They were no different. They weren't some crazy different time period. They were just like you and me, for real. He had children, Jonathan, and one of his children was 5 years old, his son. 5 years old. I have a daughter who's like 5 years old. Let's go.
These are dandelions. You pick it, and you take the stem off, right off.
What are you doing there? Are you sucking the nectar?
And then
What do they taste like?
Honey.
The leaves? What do the leaves kind of taste like? Lettuce?
Yeah.
Kind of like salad, huh?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Nantucket? Oh, okay, bite it. Oh, good job, Nantucket.
Yucky.
No, it's not yucky. It's good.
I want to eat another one. I like it. So good.
Daylilies literally live for one day. So when you find them, eat a bunch, but not tons, because they can also help to detoxify your body. And one of the ways you do that? He goes to war, which meaning he's probably similar to my age, with his dad, the king of Israel, and he dies there and orphans his children. Horrible situation. Unbelievably painful. And you know what? If I was honest, I would have been totally into that kingdom because I was doing everything I could to try to get a job and get a career started in my life before I decided to commit to ministry and to serving the Father, of being a bodyguard, of being a wet worker for rich and elite people so that I could protect them. And you know what? The Father kept shutting that down and causing catastrophic injuries to me to physically prevent me from doing it. And you know what? I'm feeling like that right now, though. Pretty lame in my feet, like Mephibosheth. This is my feet situation right now. There's one, busted up. There's two, all stinking busted up. And I'm so tired of it. I've had busted up feet for decades of my life, and it sucks so bad and it pisses me off and it gets me super depressed, if I was really honest with you guys. That's just one of those things that's just really making my life miserable right now, is being lame in my feet and having a real hard time walking, which is why I've taken up this art of staff making. Reference a lot of footage I'm gonna probably roll in here about staffs because... I'm back out with my favorite little tree. This is the American hornbeam, or it's called musclewood or ironwood. It gets that name because it kind of has these tendon-like muscle, stiff-looking features in the bark. You can see as it goes up. There you can see it really well. It's not all defined quite so well. Sometimes you get these really neat little twists going into it as well. But it is one of the densest woods grown in the United States, in North America. It will sink in water. I think it's going to make a great staff. Got to get a good straight one. All right, here is the staff I made with that piece of hornbeam. You can remember that little knob that was in the video as I was picking it. You can see it's not exactly the straightest guy ever, but I love it. He's got this very quirky little bend here, and that knot just sits perfectly where my hand is. So took the machete to him on these sides of him. I tried to leave some of that bark on there, and yeah, I shaved him all the way down and then sanded him down. So now I have to say, he definitely does not sink in water. I think the whole thing is when you pick a sapling, they don't have quite the same characteristics of a mature tree. So mature ironwood might sink in water, not this little buddy, but it's a good staff. Live dangerously, use machetes. They're super interesting. But then, you know what's cool? Is I found a scripture that it said that Yahweh took up two staffs and he carved the name of Naomi on one of his staffs. That was awesome. We'll get there in Zechariah maybe. And it really encouraged me because you know what? I'm feeling super lamed in my feet and super lamed in my soul right now. And I think that's exactly how Mephibosheth was probably starting to feel when his dad, he realized, was dead. And he was never coming back. And he was a cripple. And he was likely thinking that he's going to be killed next, which is why his nurse panicked and ran. Check this out. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to be as she hurried to flee that he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. So the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, and Rechav and Baanah went and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came into the midst of the house to fetch wheat, Milanites. And they struck him in the stomach, and Rechav and Baanah his brother escaped. Thus they came into the house when he was lying on his bed in his bedroom, and they smote him and slew him and beheaded him, and took his head and went the way of the desert plain all night. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David. at Hebron and said to the sovereign, "See, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul, your enemy, who sought your life. So Yahweh has given my master the sovereign vengeance on Shaul and his seed this day." And David answered Rechab and Baanah his brothers, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, "As Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my life out of all the distresses, when someone reported to me saying, 'See, Shaul is dead,' and he was a bearer of good news in his own eyes, I then took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more then when wicked men have slain a righteous man in his own house on his bed, should I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth?" And David commanded his young men, and they slew him and cut off their hands and feet, and they hanged them by a pool in Hebron. And they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. This is how David deals with men that are assassins and murderers, who kill the anointed kings in their beds. And you know what? That likely was my fate, you guys. If I had continued to walk in violence and bloodshed like I'd been raised to do throughout my life, it was inevitable. Because, you know why I know that? It's prophesied that he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword. And you know what? Real quick, to all of you guys out there and gals out there who are gathering up the kinds of swords that you think are what is going to protect you and stop a bad guy from coming your direction, I challenge you, watch my video titled, "Sell Your Cloak and Buy a Sword," right here below. I challenge you to watch the whole thing, all the way through, because you know what happened? If you want to live by a sword, you guys, most people are equating this to the AR-15 Tactical Assault Rifle, and whatever version of that you want to call your sword these days. I sincerely urge you, sell it. You know why? Buy one of these. I'm not joking. Buy a machete instead of your super uber awesome AR. And that's what I did with my Tavor. I had a Tavor, the Israeli battle rifle, because I learned something. I thought that Tavor was going to be the weapon that I could feed my family with in a crisis, even though bullets were so rare I'd never shoot them, and protect my family with in a crisis, even though, you know, murdering is still a serious problem when you shoot a guy in the throat. Just saying, I've had to live with some blood guilt in my life, and I can testify to what it feels like to wake up having dreams of killing people over and over again. It eats your sleep, guys, because you start to serve in this other kingdom called death. Like, I used to be in charge of churches' security teams, even Messianic congregations, shepherd's ministry. And the whole point of it was we were always convinced at any given moment somebody could come around the corner to try to take one of the children or open up with a mass shooter situation. And don't worry, I'd be the guy to stand up amidst the congregation and shoot that guy in the throat first. Meanwhile, most of us aren't memorizing as many Bible verses as we have for bullets in our arsenal. I challenge people, memorize a Bible verse for every single bullet you own and see how many bullets you own after a while. Or see how many memory verses you get, which would also be impressive. I'm not telling you guys you all have to sell every firearm you have or anything like that. I'm trying to prove a point about what it is you put your faith in. Because for me, the firearm was my last line of defense, do you know what I mean? And instead, I got a machete, which is my first line of usefulness. Because I've carved a staff with this that, you know what? I used to walk every day now because I'm lame in my feet. You know what I can't do? Be somebody guy's bodyguard right now. I'm crippled. I can't even volunteer on farms. Like I'm a volunteer migrant minister. Do you know how odd of a category that puts me in when I want to show up on somebody's land and I'm like, "Hey, I'll milk your goats. Will you let me eat here and sleep here and plug into your electricity?" "Sure." Now I'm all busted up and I can't do anything, so I'm going to lay in the bed. I can't do any of that stuff. But you know what I could do? Whittle a staff out of my machete that another migrant worker gave me because I had favor from Yahuwah to be a migrant worker and not a blood-killing murderer like these guys. Because you know what happened? These men who get their names in the scriptures are listed as the people that David personally had children murder. Let me just be real clear. Young men. You hear this phrase in scripture called young men? That's children by most of our American ideologies. 12 to 13-year-old boys became young men and began to accompany their fathers or their family members into their trade, profession, lifestyle, whatever it was. They'd go to war, which is what these young men were doing at David's side. And you know what happened? They were the ones who executed that guy, who was the blood-drinking murderer. And you know what? I want you guys to be free from that bondage because I think the Father is continually refining me to the fact that I don't have any strength in myself left. I was like the 5-year-old that got dropped into a world of nightmares. Like, I feel like Mephibosheth all the time in my life because I was crippled at such a young age with stuff that still eats my soul alive, especially around certain dates of the year, where I had to do or was made to be participants of horrible atrocities, like seeing innocent people killed in their bed and then being the person to do that, only to later find out that the criminal I thought I just stopped because he was a bad guy happened to not be a criminal at all, just happened to be somebody else's bad business partner. And that was the world that my family raised me in. And it was nightmares because here I am in a world where I shouldn't be thinking about that stuff anymore, where I'm trying to raise my own family, and instead I'm waking up with blood in my dreams still. And that's awful. And it's torture. And so when I go to a congregation or I go to a fellowship and I see their shepherd's ministry all in action with their sweet tactical earpieces and their shirts that don't conceal the size of the firearm that they're carrying, if you're going to conceal carry, gentlemen, dress around the firearm you choose to carry. Do you know what I mean by that? That's why I carry a small machete sometimes. I have big ones too, but I just prefer a machete. Anyways, when I go there and I'm trying to, fellowship and worship with other people, and instead I'm counting pistols in the room because it's just something I inherently often do. And I'm looking at all the shepherds guys who are looking at everybody else in the crowd like they're potentially a wolf. I used to be the guy leading those guys. And you know what I'm doing instead? I'm trying to be the guy that leads those guys to this because they're in a room full of people that they're looking at as potentially targets or victims. Seriously, you have to train this way. You have to condition your mind to be trying to be observant and red zone, yellow zone, black zone, ready to be situationally aware at all given times. And it makes you anxious and tense and full of fear. There's no way around it, you guys. I know what it's like to carry firearms on a regular basis. All the time, never didn't have a firearm on my person. At least one at any given time, no matter where I was. I was that guy all the time. And you know what happened? It broke my body more. Seriously, it literally pushed my hips out of alignment because I was carrying a double-stacked pistol. Because, the first time I was at a situation at a gas station robbery, there were 2 guys loading pistols in the trunk of a car next to mine. And my wife was in my car with me. And I got out to pump gas, and I saw guys loading pistols in a seat of a car late at night at a gas station, and the old dude on a ventilator, oxygen assistance, was the clerk inside. And they were gonna rob that dude, and don't worry, I came prepared with my .45. But then I suddenly saw 2 targets, and I had a single stack. So what did I do? Switch to my extended magazine, obviously. You know what I realized though? 2 targets moving laterally like this is one of the hardest shots to make at 15, 25, 30 yards. Moving targets that tend to shoot back at you in the direction that your wife is, who doesn't even know there's bad guys going that way. You know what happened? No shots were fired. But just because I simply was there, they didn't rob the guy. That was great. When I finally got in the car to tell my wife what was going on, she made an amazing suggestion. She said, honey, you don't have to fight them. You could just call the police. I grew up in a world where that was never allowed. You know what I mean? If the police show up, we better know how to bribe them. Kind of a world is where I came from. Chelsea didn't, and so she had great counsel right there. And so we called the cops. And when we sat there awkwardly, while those guys sat there with their loaded guns in their car next to mine, waiting for us to leave and me waiting for them to get into a gunfight so I could have my wife switch over into the driver's seat and I could get into the passenger seat and I could engage fire as my wife drove us away. That was my situation. That situation, what did it make me do? Instead of trying to get out of that lifestyle, I just got a double stack, baby, because I figured that was going to solve the situation. I should have brought more bullets. It would have been a better gunfight. Anyways, I sit in these congregations, you guys, and I see the weaponry that men are bringing to the church. They're bringing to their congregations. And you know what it isn't oftentimes? The living sword that comes out of your mouth that destroys your enemies. Like, the sword of the Spirit is literally the most powerful weapon in the room. You know how I know that? Because David said a couple of words, and those guys lost their heads, their hands, and their feet. The assassins, who were pretty stealthy, you guys. It takes a lot to kill a king. Like, for real. It's a serious job to kill a king in his own bedchamber. That's why it's a big message. It takes a lot less work, though, when little boys are the ones who kill you. And that's what was in my future. I was going to orphan my children. That's pretty much a guarantee. And you know what? At the time, I was totally okay with that because I was pretty miserable all the freaking time. I've been waiting to die since I was 5 years old. Since I got crippled by all the abuse and the incest that I had to endure, I've been just waiting and longing for the day I could just die. And you know when that changed? The day that I was hit by a car on the side of the road when I was driving around those rich people, and a car came off the road to try to kill me and smashed into me going 60 miles an hour and launched my body tumbling down towards a cliff. And literally an angel stopped me as I was tumbling over the side of it and saved my life. I came to consciousness after that, leaving my blood and my body imprint on the side of a car. And all I wanted to do at that moment was hear my daughter Jubilee and what she had to say.
Eat this? Yeah.
Oh. She wasn't born yet. She was in my wife's womb at the time. And all I wanted to do was hear what she had to say. That was it. I came to consciousness begging the Father to let me live so I could hear what she had to say. Because something in my soul believed that maybe that child had some words in her that would heal me. Because I've been desperate for healing for so long, and I've just been waiting for something to happen in my life that would heal me all the way so that I wouldn't be injured all the time, so that I wouldn't be suffering in my soul all the time, so that I would be at peace and stop being angry. It's that my children would see a man at peace and not know a father who was irritable and raging. I didn't want my children to grow up with me. Like I wanted to escape from them so they didn't have to be around the monster. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be away from them. And yet he's put me in a place and in a lifestyle where I'm with them continually in a rectangle. I live in a tiny little shoebox with my children and my wife constantly. And you know what? I grew up in a life where I thought that was torture. Being around children was torture because of what people did to children tortured my soul. And it's hard for me to separate those two realities. Being around my family is life, and at the same time, it's anguish. And some of you understand that. Some of you who have been exposed to violence and exposed to heart-pounding situations, when you get back into the normal world, you're dying inside. Your soul has been conditioned to an adrenaline-filled lifestyle that doesn't happen normally. But when that was your normal, this seems to be one of the only things that comes to bring it out. And you know what? That's why I've enjoyed farming, because I get to go swing a machete with all my freaking might and chop down bamboo and build a house for plants. And you know what? That helped me so much. And at the same time, it was one of the hardest things I have ever done, because it was so wired in me to be afraid of that lifestyle, that it is an undoing process for me every single day. I choose to be present with my family, to choose to be in life, to choose to be in the Word and not in the kingdom of death. It is anguish. It is going against the stream. I went to sit down in this river, and it was so painful to try to get across these rocks, and it took me forever to just get across this stinking little creek, and I felt like I went to sit down, and the Father told me, go upstream. And it was grueling. And it's painful for me just to take a few steps, and I had to walk up this stream. But you know what? So many of you men and women, you need to walk upstream, even if you're crippled and even if you're lame, because that's where His strength comes to you. The only time I can find life in this world is when I am broken and weak, and I know He will strengthen me. I know He will pour down His courage on me and give me the ability to keep going, to persevere, because I want to receive a crown of life. I don't want my head to be taken from my shoulders by my commander. I want to live forever with Him. That's what I'm on my quest for. I want to live forever, and I want a new body that's not broken and tortured. I want immortality. And He promises that. And I believe His word is true, and I believe He will give me insatiable joy as a crown forever. And I know He can give it to you. So those of you that are despairing, those of you who are battling your fierce mental anguishes, those familiar pains that have plagued you your whole life, I pray the Father would pour out His favor on you, that He would lift up His countenance upon you and give you shalom, that you would no longer feel the emptiness, but that He would fill you up with streams of living water that would water your weary soul. I love you all. Thank you guys for being so courageous out there. I pray that you would live dangerously every single day, and that you would go, please pray for our family. And remember us today. We love you all. We'll talk to you soon.